My guests are Brian Grant, a 12-year NBA vet, founder of the Brian Grant Foundation. You can find more about the Brian Grant Foundation at briangrant.org. Also, Ric Bucher, NBA analyst for SF1, and also author of the book Rebound, which is Brian Grant's life story. Rebound, soaring in the NBA, battling Parkinson's, and finding what really matters. It can be purchased at Amazon.com and bookstores everywhere. These guys are two good friends of mine. This has been a long project. It's finally come to fruition. How are you guys?
Oh, I'm doing good. I mean, I look like I could be the sun the way it's beaming off my face right now. But these are the things. These are the types of things you do for good friends of yours, like I am with you. You're a very good friend. I'll burn up in a car. It doesn't matter. You're my guy.
Thank you.
I'm just glad that the book is out and it's doing well after Brian had introduced it as being called Power Forward and not
You don't
Rebound.
have proof of that. Rick, you don't have proof of that.
Yeah, it's on Twitter, I think. I think you're right. I saw that. You can't
People
even
went
get the
right
book
by
name
it.
right.
It didn't bother them, and I'm grateful. Power Forward actually, I think, was one of the titles we talked about at one point. Brian BG suggested it, and I think this was his backhanded way of still introducing it to people and finding out whether it would have been a better title.
You won out on it because when I said it, only you recognized it, I think.
Yeah.
All
Anyway.
right, so before we get started, let's let our audience know how we know each other, because this is different than a typical guest that I may have on Sports Business Radio. Brian Grant and I worked together for, 11 years, 12 years? I was his publicist. I was his business manager. I met him when he was playing for the Blazers. I consider him like a brother. We're very, very close. Ric Bucher, I also consider like a brother. I've known him for a long time. We're business partners now. So to see the two of you work together on this book was really great for me. I think the book turned out amazing. Brian, let's start with you. Why was now the time to write the book?
It was time. Really, it was that I had the courage to tell the whole story because I always knew I wanted to tell my story because I think it's an interesting one coming from where I came from, overcoming some obstacles and making it to where I made it to. But in order to really tell a story, I needed to be able to tell it the complete story. And I was never really comfortable with that until this year.
What changed? Why did you become more comfortable with it?
I think it was just all the things that were going on in the world. You know, we hadn't hit COVID or anything like that yet, but I was, going in and out of relationships, was having some issues, parenting, things like that. And then it was just like, it's time to kind of let some of this go. It's time to try to put something out there that would be not only good for other people, but good for myself as far as healing.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you feel like the book was in a way therapeutic for you?
It was very therapeutic. And, as we continued to work on it, Rick and I mean, he started bringing up things that I didn't even notice or know that I was saying or read it back to me. I was like, you're right. This is very healing. This is something that's needed to happen for years.
Rick, you wrote Yao Ming's book. This is a very different book. When Brian came to you and said, I want you to write my book, what went through your mind?
Well, I don't know if you know this, BG, but I've been approached by a number of athletes and people who wanted to write a book and wanted me to help them write it. And I never wanted to just write a book to write a book or to, because I could put my name on another title or do it for the money or whatever. I always felt like I had to have a passion for what I was writing about and what the subject was, and that it was an important story. And I certainly felt that the connection with Brian, with BG's story and Yao's is that I felt both were important and they were unique. But to get to the, so initially reading about Michael J. Fox, reading his book about having Parkinson's, and then hearing bits and pieces of what Brian had been through aside from Parkinson's, his career, opioid addiction, all sorts of elements. I was like, this is a story that should be told, and that needs to be told, and that people are going to get a lot of value out of reading it. And then it was just a matter of BG and I coming to the point where we were going to tell an honest version of that story, where I felt like I'm not being party to telling a version of BG's life, or a palatable or kind of camouflaged version, that we were going to do the real thing. And it took a lot of courage on BG's part, and a lot of trust in me that, some of the things that we delved into, that there was a reason behind telling those stories. And so I'm grateful to hear that that BG feels like we did it, his story, justice, and we honored everything that he was hoping to accomplish.
I want to back up. I want to go back several years. I remember a breakfast with Brian Grant at Cafe Dewberry in Portland, and it was just the two of us. And it was the first time that he told me that he had Parkinson's. And I remember you were getting ready, BG, to do a halftime, half-court thing with Jerome Kersey and a few others, and you were worried about your tremor. And we talked about the fact that either someone else could write your story, or you could take the narrative and do the story. So one of the things we talked about was having Rick, when he was with ESPN, come to Portland, sit in your living room, and you did an interview with Rick that was on SportsCenter. And that was kind of when you told the world that you had Parkinson's. So I felt like from afar, that was like the first time you guys really built a trust. Brian was sharing with Rick something very personal in his living room. And that's why I thought, if you fast forward later, I thought Rick was the perfect person to write the book.
No, I mean, when I announced that I had Parkinson's, and, I thought of Rick because I knew his work, and I knew him from, games commentating and things like that. But when he came to the house and I really got a chance to get to really know him, I was glad that I made the decision that I made, as far as him telling the world that I had Parkinson's. He was with the kids and myself all day. His film crew was there all day. It wasn't as though he was pushing for this or that. He really wanted to know how I wanted it done. And once I did that, he put his touch on it and put it out there the right way. And, once I knew that, he was a writer and author too, I kind of knew, but I was interviewing other people, and then you brought his name up. And I just thought, please let this be a good fit again. And as soon as we talked, I knew it right away that you'd be able to tell my story. And it wasn't like, the first draft was the only draft. I mean, we had differences on certain things. Certain things I started to get cold feet on again, and you'd be like, hey, man, it's your story, it's your truth. And that part of it, I don't think anybody else would have been able to do to me. I'd have been like, no, change it. And, he made me look at it from a holistic side of it, how it's not only going to help me, but help others as well.
Rick, what was that like for you, having to push back a little bit on tell the whole story? And I know there are some things here that may not be comfortable, but we need to tell the whole story.
Yeah. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, because I didn't want to tell pieces of the story just for it to be salacious. And I'll say this, I initially came into it, and we first talked about addiction and recovery and all of that. And I thought at one point that was like, telling that whole story was going to be a really important part of the book. And we went back and forth on that. And Brian got to a point where he was willing to tell that story. But as I learned more and more about him and the story, it kind of receded. And it was really just kind of one of those points where it was a test of our trust and our willingness to work together to tell the story in the most useful, beneficial way, as opposed to the drama of Brian's life. And so, I constantly had to double check. Am I asking Brian to tell this part of the story because it is captivating for me? Or, and to me, it couldn't be just that. It couldn't be just because it was salacious or it was captivating. It was like, but is it meaningful to tell this? And so it's been really interesting to do this, because this was, as Brian said, it's like kind of a living document, and things were evolving in both of our lives as we went about writing the book. And so sometimes it felt kind of like a moving target. But it's been interesting because I've had a few health scares myself of late, and I can say firsthand that Brian's story and what I learned about being on the inside of that, like, I found myself in some very similar positions, and so the thought process that he went through and his willingness to talk about that and share it with others, and that constant battle of living in the present and not dismissing what you're dealing with and feeling your mortality. Like, I've felt all of that recently, and it only underscored how powerful his story is, and how meaningful I believe it can be to people out there. Because, in some ways it's unique, and in some ways it's part of life that everybody deals with.
One of the things that evolved while you were writing this book, and I think it was really important, is, Rick, you went home to Brian, to his home in Georgetown, Ohio, and you had the opportunity to meet his dad, who passed about a year ago. How important was it to go home with Brian to Georgetown to meet Tommy Grant and to see the family and see where Brian came from if you're writing his story?
Yeah, it was enormous. I felt like I had a certain kinship with Brian because I grew up in Cincinnati. But let me tell you, man, Georgetown is different from Cincinnati. I know Ohio, and I knew places like Georgetown existed, but there's something about going there and feeling like, a friend of mine would always refer to the area as Cinceltucky. And Georgetown is Cinceltucky, man. I mean, it is like, you got the Ohio River between Ohio and Kentucky, but there is a lot of Kentucky in that part of Ohio. And so it was having that reference and really having a sense of just how remote that place is that BG came from. And then seeing the family and experience the family. And it also gave me the confidence to say, when we're going to talk about your family, I've met these people. I've broken bread with these people. I can't say I know them all, but it gave me a vibe for the family that I was like, dude, we gotta tell this, because this is part of your makeup. It's part of who you are, and it's part of what informed you going forward. And Brian can speak to this, but I felt like it gave me the license to say, no, you need to tell this because it explains why you made some of the decisions that you made. It explains how you behaved the way you did at certain points in your life. And it certainly explained that to me. And I found that incredibly valuable in being able to convince BG that he should tell this, because now I just believe nobody does anything. Everybody does things for a reason. They have a rationale, right? It makes sense to them, even from the outside. If we look at it and go, dude, I don't know, that probably wasn't a good idea. And I felt there was a lot of that. Like if you knew where BG came from, if you knew how he grew up, if you knew all that, it explained so much of what he did as we saw him step onto the big stage. And now nationally, everybody is seeing who he is.
BG, I've been home with you too, to Georgetown. And one of my first takeaways when I came home was, man, just to make it out of Georgetown is an accomplishment. And that's no offense against Georgetown, but to get to Xavier and then to get to be a lottery pick in the NBA, to get to have a 12-year career, to start a foundation that helps people with Parkinson's, like it's really an amazing list of accomplishments for you, because honestly, a lot of people wouldn't have made it out of little tiny Georgetown. So when you were growing up, were there days where you were like, I may never make it out of here. I may be in Georgetown my whole life?
There were very few days when I thought that I would make it out. I mean, most of the days were spent saying, oh my God, okay, when I graduate, maybe I can go work at Ortner's, which was a railroad boxcar repair shop in Mount Orb, or I can go and work at Mac Tools with my mom, who's got almost 15, 20 years in, and I can get a floor job and maybe I can do 20 years. There was no dreaming. I mean, actually, if you did dream, that's all it was, because it's not like today. Like my kids can be like, man, I really wonder what it's like to be in England, in London or Manchester. And they can go on a webcam over there and actually see people walking around in London or Manchester or somewhere in Spain. But for us, there was no internet. There was, we were just starting to get the touch telephones. Call waiting was something that was huge for us, because now we didn't have to miss calls. But, when you dreamed back then, you really dreamed. And so to make it, to me, was to get out of Georgetown and get to Cincinnati and be in the city. And like, there'll be opportunities there. But I didn't dream beyond that, because first of all, there was nobody around me doing that. I had no family members that had done it that I could say, well, they did it, so maybe I can do it. And most of the time it was people telling me what I couldn't do. So to make it out of Georgetown, it was something. And, to bring the two of you back there, especially Rick, when we went to the basketball court where I played at, I just looked at your face and you were like, it's like you were imagining all those stories I was telling you. You could see them happening on the court. And I was like, see, it's like boxed in. Now imagine all this parking lot's full of cars, people surrounding the fence. They want to see, is Brian going to dunk it today?
Come true.
Okay, I'm going to tell you that in 1 second, Bert. I just got to get some crackers behind this phone. Damn.
Oh
Sorry, guys. I'm a professional. I am. Just trying to keep.
We're gonna have to, and you want to host a podcast?
There we go. All right. Wipe your sweat. Okay. Go with it, Burger.
Okay. So when did you start to think that maybe your dreams could come true and that you could get out of Georgetown?
Well, it definitely didn't start when I got the opportunity to play my senior year. It started to turn for me probably halfway between the basketball season, because I started getting letters from colleges like Wilmington College, which is a NAIA. I had a cousin going to school there, and I went down to visit her, and I thought, my God, I might be able to go to Wilmington College, but I still would have had to pay like four grand to go, which my parents couldn't pay. And then as we kept going, after Xavier came up and Dino Gaudio made the comment not to let anybody else see me, I was thinking, like, is this serious? The Xavier Musketeers that beat the Georgetown Hoyas, they're actually looking at me. And when that happened, that's when I got excited. I started to be like, oh my God, I might be able to make it. So I definitely didn't want to get in trouble. I wanted to keep playing basketball as hard as I could. And then when we didn't make we made the tournament and got beaten districts. You know, Pete Gillen walks in the locker room and offers me the scholarship, and I accepted right there. Yes, give it to me. I'll take it. I'm yours. And that, you know, that's when a dream became a reality, literally.
Rick, when is the first time that you ever heard of Brian Grant?
The first time I ever heard him?
The first time you ever heard of Brian Grant. Did you ever hear of him when he was at Xavier? Did you not hear about him until he got to the Kings and was drafted in the NBA? When's the first time?
It was, when he was drafted, that was when he, you know, and then I heard about him and he was like this guy that no one really knew about. Kind of fit the profile of the Midwest though, this hardworking, rebounding, kind of no-name power forward. I mean, he was perfect. Like I was thinking, of course he's from Ohio. Of course he's from Xavier. Like that's, you know, Tyrone Hill. Like he was in that model of kind of no frills, just work hard, overachiever types. And so that was the beginning of when I heard about Brian. I will say this, you know, talking about him getting out of Georgetown reminded me, my colleague on FS1, Marcellus Wiley, was just talking the other day about meeting with his therapist and always worrying about, you know, what's next and how do I achieve the next thing? And am I accomplishing what I'm supposed to accomplish? And his therapist said to him, he said, Marcellus, you've won. Like he's from Compton and ended up going to Columbia and, you know, with all he's accomplished and played in the NFL, he said, you've won. Like you've already exceeded all expectations. You're on the great, whatever you do from here, this is gravy. You defied all expectations. You already broke the mold. And I feel like Brian's in that same camp and almost probably faces the same thing, wondering, you know, what's left, or what do I have to do next, or what's the next mountain to climb, and not always recognizing all the mountains in the rearview mirror that have already been, you know, those summits have already been reached. And I thought it was a really good reminder for all of us, honestly, like for all of us being here right now, thinking about what we're doing this podcast about BG's book on your podcast, Brian, and like we're in a pretty good spot. I'd say we all in our own ways have defied expectations one way or the other.
I agree with you. I tell Brian Grant all the time, you know, whether it's the impact he has on someone who has Parkinson's, who walks up to him and talks to him, or what he did in the community for so many years that he played in the NBA. He was J. Walter Kennedy Citizenship Award winner. I don't think he's ever really stopped to recognize his impact. BG, would you say you're still kind of in that place that you don't think you've won, or you haven't stopped to really think about what you've accomplished?
I think from time to time I stop and I think about it, but you know, I kind of always feel like the work isn't done. Like there's something more, you know, and I don't mean more for me, like to benefit me, but more to benefit whoever, you know, whether it be charity work, whether it be hooking back up with you. Like if you'd have told me that me and Rick were going to be hooking up again and doing a book 10 years ago, I'd have been like, right. Yeah, right. You know, I just would have thought that. But in searching and always feeling like, okay, what's next? God put us together, man. And I truly believe that, because nobody could have conveyed my message to the world the way Rick did. And, you know, I'm going to always be grateful for that. And, you know, the book's getting good reviews, not just because of it's a good story, but because of the way the story was told. And I think if I would have went with anybody else, it would have been a decent story, but it wouldn't have been something that you can't put down. And that's what I keep hearing over and over and over again. I mean, I started it and I don't even read, but I read it in 2 days. So
Yeah, that's a high compliment. And Rick is an excellent writer. And, I thought from day one, I'm biased, but I thought Rick was the perfect person to write your book, B. Um, what else is there for you to do, B. Grant? Again, your work with Parkinson's is so important. And, I know you and I have gone and seen Michael J. Fox, and we've seen what he's doing. I think you've chosen a great lane yourself. Your foundation isn't necessarily looking for the cure. You're looking to assist people who are living with Parkinson's every day like you are. And how do you eat, and how do you exercise? How do you tell your kids if you're diagnosed with Parkinson's? What's ahead for you?
Well, first of all, let's just say that this is a funny camera angle coming from the bottom up, so it kind of makes the neck look swollen. And I did pick up the COVID 25, so I just want to clear the air on that real quick. Nutrition and exercise, definitely. But no, on a serious note, our foundation, people think that our foundation is much larger than it is. And it's really a small foundation. Katrina and two other workers, and then myself being a part of that. But it's the information we put out, and the way that we put it out, it allows me to still be very personable with people that we help. And I think that's the route that we're going to continue to go. I don't think this foundation will end up being a huge foundation like Michael J. Fox's. He had that outreach. He had that with me ever since I saw Back to the Future and Frighteners and all that. I mean, I'm such a big Michael J. Fox fan. Ali was a world-class athlete. I think I have my place, and I don't think it's really to be on that large of a stage, but the area that I'm in, we'll continue to do the best work that we can to help the Parkinson's community until we can't do it anymore.
Rick, now that the book's out, what are you hearing from people again about, Brian's not on the Muhammad Ali or the Michael J. Fox level, but there's a lot of people he's inspiring with this book. Not only the courage to tell his entire story, but also the fact that he's battling Parkinson's. What kind of feedback are you getting?
Well, it was surprising to me how many people weren't fully aware of his story, weren't completely aware that he was fighting Parkinson's, or that he had contracted young onset Parkinson's. I think they just remember the Rasta monster. And so people are touched by the fact that they've learned all that he's doing. And, he's just in such I always sensed this, generally, if you're going to do a book about some, an NBA player or a professional athlete, they're a Hall of Famer, or they've accomplished some accolade in their sport that is the crux of why you write a book about them. And Brian, not to say that Brian didn't accomplish a lot in his career, but what makes him unique is how fans connected to him, how they revered the way he went about his job, what he represented to them as this hardworking, humble, but fierce competitor, never wanting to turn down a challenge. And so you juxtapose that with someone who, and I think they also learned all of the things that Brian was doing to help those in need, kids with terminal diseases, etc., before he had Parkinson's. That big heart was already there, and in some ways, Parkinson's just unleashed it in a new and different way. And that's what I'm hearing from people as they read and learn about his story, is that they had one image of Brian that they certainly respected and admired, but getting the full scope of him, the travails, all of it, actually gives them a deeper respect and admiration for who he is. And I think that ultimately that was what BG was after in writing the book. Like, if you're going to cheer for me, I want you to know all of me, not because I necessarily think you're going to think more of me. You may think less, but I'm going to put that on the table and let you make your decision. And it appears to me as if, people have gained a greater respect, even seeing how human he has been at times.
BG, what was the hardest part of your story to tell?
I thought really that it was going to be my struggles with addiction, but it was really reliving all the negative, bad stuff that I put Gina through. That, as I told the story, I mean, I couldn't hide it from Rick. He could just tell my voice would always change. And finally, when we're getting towards the end of the project, he just said, man, you know what? I see this as being one big thing that you've always had pinned up, and you're letting it out. And Berger, I think you said that, this is opening the door to have one final conversation with Gina to tell my truth and to, ask for whatever forgiveness I need so that I can really truly move on in life. And so I think that was one of the toughest parts to talk about. Addiction is addiction, alcoholism. A lot of people that have that gene or allergy or sickness. And yeah, I was thinking more or less, I was scared to talk about that because I was scared that people wouldn't like me anymore. But after I got over that, it was easy to put down on paper. But the stuff about Gina was definitely the toughest.
And Gina is your ex-wife. You have 4 children with her. Rick, would you agree that that was one of the parts of the book that maybe going into it, you didn't think that was going to be a main theme, but coming out of it, you were like, wow, this is big.
Yeah, no, I had no expectation that was going to be as relevant or integral to the book as it turned out to be. I said to my wife at one point, after I asked her to read one of the first drafts, I said, you know what this is? You know what this really is? This is a love story. This is, I mean, in essence, it was the dream, because as the book says, Brian dreamed of one day of getting out of Georgetown and meeting that girl, listening to the song West End Girls by the Pet Shop.
West End Girls, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
my sports, I think I was 14.
Yeah.
15.
And so to have that dream come true, and then to feel as if you ruined what you were handed, like coming to terms with that, finding some resolution, that just, that feeling like I found the one, and I let that one go, or I lost that one. I mean, that ended up being, I think, at least maybe not the thread. I could even make the case, the thread that if you look at Brian's story, it ties it all together.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've known Gina a long time too, and I have a lot of respect for her. She's a great mom. She's a good woman. And I have told BG this on our walks. Like, I hope at some point they're able to have a conversation and mend that fence, because I think they're both good people. There were just things that happened that, sometimes you're only in life with someone for one season, or a few seasons. You're not in life with them for the entire season. And I feel like Brian and Gina were in a few seasons together, but it wasn't meant to be that they were together for their whole life. But it doesn't make either one of them a bad person. Right.
So that and Brian, BJ, I'd love to get your view of this, but I also believe that nothing happens by accident, and that everything that happens in our life is something we're supposed to learn from, to take us to the next step, or it's motivation to fully appreciate what we have. The things that go away are to allow us to appreciate what we have. And what I've also come to believe is that, like, I can't necessarily make a relationship the way I want it to be, but I can come to terms with finding peace with how that relationship is. And that's what I felt with BG. And in telling this story, it was like, you know what, however Gina is going to feel about what's happened and what's done, gone on, and what her part was in it, like, no control over that. Like, there's no way of changing her or fixing that or doing any of that. But like, I felt like BG had to come to terms with where he was and what happened then, and understanding it and accepting it and believing that at the end of the day, it was for the best, that things happened exactly the way they did. Like, who's to say that, that the way that relationship went wasn't the inspiration to make sure that his family and his kids were together the way they are, and to be the father that he is. And like that motivation to be that person in their lives didn't come from the relationship ultimately not being the way it was with Gina. I believe there's a way of finding the good out of anything that happens, even if it looks like it's something that we initially look at as bad.
BG,
You're right.
a few more minutes, but yeah, respond to what Rick just said. And, I think you're an incredible dad, and, you're so involved in each one of your kids' lives. And maybe Rick's right. Maybe that doesn't happen if you were in the normal structure of a family. Maybe it's happened a little bit more because of the fact that you and Gina aren't together anymore.
And I think you're absolutely right. If I look back in the past and I say to myself, what kind of father was I when I played? I was the best that I could be at that time, but I was always having to worry about the next guy coming in, taking my job, the next season coming up. Where are we going to live? What are we going to do? Who do I got to play? Who do I got to guard? That kind of stuff. And a lot of times when I was there, I really wasn't there. It's like I'm sitting here looking at my two little boys, Brian and Maxwell, playing with Jaden, who was about to be 23. And it's sad a little bit, because I look at Jaden and I say, you're not getting everything that these kids are getting right now. They get my full-on attention, and when I'm with them, I'm with them. Gina made that all right back then, and she was always making it all right. And if we would have had a convince, if our marriage would have stuck, maybe I'll retire, and now I'm doing something else that takes away my time from them as young adults, and now I don't have that relationship. You're absolutely right. I mean, sometimes you got to lose something to gain a little bit or a whole lot. And I hated losing Gina, but I understood, and I think through this whole process, I've been able to really look at myself and say, it takes two. But only side that you have control of is your side of the street. And I think that's been, very key in my life lately.
Rick, last question for you. When people read Rebound, what do you want them to take away from the story?
I'd say that we all have our own personal struggles that are unique, and they come in different packages, and our paths and what the travails that we have to survive in order to get to where we're going are all very different, but that there's something at the heart of it, at the heart of them all, that are the same. And that, you look at this 6'9" dreaded black man with Parkinson's, and you think, well, what do I have in common with him? And if you hear his story, you have a lot. People have a lot in common with Brian. And I think it's inspirational for me I can tell you without a shadow, it is inspirational to me to see what he's walked through and how he's handling it and how he continues to handle it. And having had a very up close view of the dark days, the days couldn't get a hold of him, the days where I was very fearful of his state of mind, and yet to see him persevere and still be the jokester that he is every freaking time we talk or we see each other. Like there's always a zinger coming from BG, whether it's for me or one of my kids or whatever it is. And you know, I can just say I love you, brother.
Yeah. I mean, I told someone the other day, Rick, I've said I love you to my friends more in the last year since COVID started than I've ever said in my entire life. And, you know, we started this interview. I said, you guys are like brothers to me. I love both of you guys. I'll say that here to my audience. And, you know, I'm closer to BG because we live right down the street from each other. I don't see Rick as much, but man, I would do anything in the world for you guys. And it's so great for me to see you guys work together on this project. It's so great for Brian's story to get out. I mean, I don't know if Brian realizes this or not, but like, you know, B, we sit here and we worry about you. We see the Parkinson's take your body more and more every day. And, you know, it was so important to me because I think you have such a great story and you have an amazing legacy that you can leave. I wanted your story to be told. And again, I thought Rick was a perfect person to tell your story. So, you know, I wasn't directly involved in this. You guys did a lot more work on this project than I did, but in a little small way, I'm so glad that your story's out there and that it's out there forever and that generations, whether it's your kids or their kids' kids, they will know the Brian Grant story. And I think that's a win for all of us.
Well, Brian, don't downplay your part in this. This book doesn't happen if you made it happen. I mean, you brought us together and you certainly, I know we're after BG in a variety of ways to stay on it and to make it happen. So don't discount your part in this for sure.
Well, like I said, I'm just glad the story's out there. And you know, I think it's a great story. And a lot of people, whether they know Brian through Parkinson's or they were a fan of his play in the NBA or they know him from growing up, I think people are going to benefit from this story. So B, I'll end with this. What do you want people to take away from your book?
You know, some people may be inspired, some may not be, and that's okay. Whether you like the book or you absolutely hate it, I just hope that you come away from it saying, you know what, I really don't like that guy. I don't like his story, but damn, it was real. It was real. And I take my hat off to him and Ric Bucher for putting a real story out there instead of putting a fluffy, cozy, comfortable story that, you know, we can just, you know, it came with the mallet, the hammer, and put it down. And if you want to jump on board, cool. If you don't like it, that's okay too, but it was real.
Yeah. Rebound, soaring in the NBA, battling Parkinson's and finding what really matters. It can be purchased on Amazon.com or at bookstores everywhere. Brian Grant, Ric Bucher. Love you guys. Great job with the book. Thanks so much for joining me on Sports Business Radio.
Thanks, fellas.
Thanks, Burger. Love both of you guys, man.
Yep.
You're listening to Sports Business Radio. We'll be right back.